I had everything planned, Christmas gifts for her parents and a perfect proposal. Then she told me I couldn't attend, a friend was coming. Months later, I walked away, and now she can't handle seeing me happier with someone else. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having someone show you exactly who they are before you make the biggest mistake of your life. I'm Marcus, 28, and I manage construction projects here in Denver. I'm the guy who shows up early, stays late, and makes sure every detail is handled right the first time. Maybe that sounds boring to some people, but when you're coordinating million-dollar builds with dozens of subcontractors, attention to detail isn't optional, it's survival. I met Sophie at my buddy Derek's housewarming party in April 2021, right when Denver was starting to feel normal again after the pandemic. She was helping in the kitchen, organizing appetizers with this focused intensity that caught my attention. Most people at parties are trying to look busy while actually doing nothing, but she was genuinely making sure everyone had what they needed. Sophie was a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital, petite with auburn hair and these expressive green eyes that lit up when she talked about her patients. When Derek introduced us, she immediately asked about my work, not in that polite small-talk way, but like she actually wanted to understand what I did. Construction project management sounds incredibly stressful, she said, arranging crackers on a platter with the same precision I used to read blueprints. How do you keep track of everything without going crazy? Most people hear construction and think I just yell at guys in hard hats, but Sophie got it. She understood that my job was basically professional problem solving under pressure, coordinating dozens of moving parts while keeping everyone safe and on schedule. We ended up talking until Derek kicked us out at 2 a.m., covering everything from work to family to her confession that she'd always wanted to learn basic carpentry but felt intimidated by power tools. The connection was immediate and genuine, built on actual compatibility rather than just attraction. Our first official date was dinner at this little Italian place in Highlands, where she insisted on splitting the check despite my protests. "I asked you out too," she said with a smile that made my chest tight. Equal participation from day one. That should have been my first clue about who she really was underneath. Someone who believed in partnership, not dependence. The early months were everything a relationship should be. Sophie would stop by my job sites sometimes during her lunch breaks, bringing coffee and asking intelligent questions about the progress. She wasn't just being polite, she genuinely wanted to understand my world. When I mentioned wanting to restore a vintage Ford Bronco I'd found on Craigslist, she didn't roll her eyes or complain about it taking time away from her. Instead, she asked if she could help, spending weekends in my garage learning to use basic tools and actually getting excited about small victories like successfully installing new brake pads. Meeting her parents sealed the deal for me. Robert was a retired police chief, and Linda had been an elementary school principal for 30 years. They were exactly the kind of people you'd want in your corner, straightforward, hardworking, with strong values and zero tolerance for nonsense. The first time Sophie brought me to their house in Lakewood, Robert spent an hour showing me his workshop and asking detailed questions about my construction projects. Not interrogating me, but genuinely interested in my work and impressed by the responsibility involved. Anyone who can manage $1 million build and keep everyone safe knows how to handle pressure, he told Linda later, loud enough for me to hear. Sophie found herself a good one. Linda was equally welcoming, immediately including me in family traditions and asking my opinion on everything from vacation planning to home improvement projects. They had this beautiful relationship, 32 years married, still holding hands during movies, still making each other laugh. That's what I wanted with Sophie, that kind of partnership that only gets stronger over time. By the 6-month mark, I was spending more time at Sophie's apartment than my own, but it felt natural, not rushed. She loved my systematic approach to everything from meal planning to weekend projects. "You make me feel so secure," she told me one evening while we worked on refinishing an old dining table she'd inherited. "I never have to worry about anything falling through the cracks when you're involved." She'd been burned by flaky guys before, the type who made plans they didn't keep, promised things they couldn't deliver, treated relationships like casual entertainment rather than serious partnership. With me, she said, she could actually relax and trust that when I said something would happen, it would happen. That reliability wasn't boring to her, it was precious. Sophie started joining me on weekend camping trips, hiking trails in Rocky Mountain National Park, and learning to appreciate the peace that comes from disconnecting from everything electronic. She even bought her own sleeping bag and hiking boots, gradually building a collection of outdoor gear as our adventures became a regular thing. Watching her confidence grow as she tackled more challenging trails was incredibly attractive, not just physically, but seeing someone push past their comfort zone and discover new strengths. By November 2022, something shifted in Sophie, and I should have paid closer attention to the warning signs instead of assuming it was just seasonal stress from her job. The pediatric unit always got busier during flu season, and I figured her restlessness was just exhaustion manifesting in weird ways. She started making offhand comments about our routine feeling predictable and questioning whether we were moving too fast, despite having been together for over a year and a half. The first red flag was her sudden fascination with social media, specifically Instagram accounts focused on travel photography and adventure lifestyle content. Sophie had never been particularly interested in that stuff before, preferring books and actual conversations to endless scrolling. But suddenly she was spending an hour every evening looking at exotic locations and spontaneous adventure posts. "Look at this guy's photos from Costa Rica," she'd say, shoving her phone in my face during dinner. "Can you imagine just dropping everything and going somewhere completely wild like that?" I'd look at pictures of some photographer hanging off cliffs or sleeping in hammocks surrounded by wildlife, and honestly, it looked exhausting and impractical to me. "Looks like a great way to get malaria and go broke," I joke, but Sophie didn't find it funny anymore. She'd get this wistful expression like I was missing something fundamental about life, some essential understanding about what it meant to really live. The photographer's name was Cole, and gradually his content became a regular topic of conversation. Cole had just returned from 3 months documenting wildlife in Costa Rica, sleeping in the jungle and living off whatever he could fit in a backpack. According to his posts, he was some kind of free spirit who followed his passion wherever it led, never staying in one place too long, never getting bogged down by conventional expectations. "He's so brave," Sophie would say, scrolling through pictures of Cole rappelling down waterfalls or camping alone in remote forests. "Most people are too scared to live like that, too attached to their comfort zones." I started to notice that these comments came with sideways glances at me, like maybe I was one of those scared, comfort zone people she was talking about. Meanwhile, I was working on a particularly challenging project, a sustainable housing development that required coordinating with environmental specialists, navigating complex city regulations, and managing a team of subcontractors who all had strong opinions about how things should be done. It was exactly the kind of work I loved, solving complex problems while building something meaningful that would last. But when I tried to share the interesting challenges with Sophie, she'd nod politely and then pivot the conversation back to Cole's latest adventure or some article she'd read about people who quit their jobs to travel the world. "Don't you ever wonder what it would be like to just take off?" she asked one evening while I was reviewing project schedules for the following week. "Pack a bag and go somewhere you've never been with no plan and no timeline?" I looked up from my laptop, where I was coordinating delivery schedules for the next phase of construction. "Not really. I like knowing where I'm going and having a plan to get there safely." "But doesn't that feel limiting sometimes? Like maybe you're missing out on experiences because you're so focused on control and predictability?" The word control hit different than her previous comments. This wasn't just about travel preferences, she was questioning something fundamental about who I was. "I don't see planning as limiting," I said carefully. "I see it as responsible. My job requires precision because people's safety depends on it. That's not control, that's accountability." Sophie sighed and went back to her phone, probably to look at more pictures of Cole dangling from rope bridges in Central America. That's when I realized Cole wasn't just some random content creator she followed. He was becoming a symbol of everything she thought was missing from our life together. The criticism became more frequent and specific. Our weekend hiking trips were always the same trails. Our dinner routine was predictable. Even my systematic approach to household tasks, which she used to appreciate, was now obsessive and rigid. When I suggested we plan a vacation for the holidays, she complained that I was already researching hotels and activities instead of just seeing where the moment takes us. Everything with you has to be planned months in advance, she said with frustration that felt completely unfair. What if I want to be spontaneous? What if I want to do something crazy and unplanned? I reminded her that spontaneity was great for evening activities or weekend adventures, but major decisions, like taking time off work or spending significant money, required some planning. That's not being rigid, that's being an adult with responsibilities. But Sophie was already comparing me to Cole, who apparently never planned anything beyond his next photo opportunity. December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas, started like any other evening, with me in the living room surrounded by carefully wrapped gifts and Sophie checking her phone with that distracted intensity that had become her default mode. I'd spent months selecting presents for her parents. A vintage police badge collection for Robert that I'd tracked down through collector networks, and rare orchid varieties for Linda's greenhouse that required special ordering from specialty nurseries. For Sophie, I'd found this beautiful vintage compass necklace, engraved with coordinates of the spot where we'd had our first camping trip together. The engagement ring was hidden in my sock drawer, a classic solitaire that had taken me 4 months of overtime pay to afford, waiting for Christmas morning when I planned to propose at sunrise during our traditional holiday hike. Everything was planned perfectly, or so I thought. "Marcus, we need to talk," Sophie said, setting down her phone with that tone that means someone's about to change everything. I looked up from the ribbon I was tying on Linda's gift, immediately sensing that whatever conversation was coming would be more serious than her usual complaints about my predictability. "What's going on?" "I've been thinking about Christmas dinner, about us, about where we're heading." She was twisting her hands in that nervous way that meant she'd already made a decision and was just figuring out how to deliver it. "I can't bring you to my parents' house for Christmas." The words hit like cold water. I stopped mid-tie, the ribbon falling loose in my hands. "What do you mean you can't bring me? We've been planning this for months. Your parents are expecting me." "I know this is terrible timing, but I need space to figure things out. Cole's in town, and I invited him to Christmas dinner instead." Cole. Of course it was Cole. The travel photographer who represented everything she thought was missing from our structured, predictable life together. "You uninvited me from Christmas dinner to bring another guy?" My voice stayed calm, but inside something cold was settling in my stomach. "It's not like that. Cole's just a friend, but being around him makes me realize how stuck we've become. Everything with us feels so planned, so inevitable. When's the last time we did something spontaneous? When's the last time you surprised me?" I gestured around the living room at the carefully wrapped presents, each one representing hours of thought and consideration. "I surprise you constantly. I pay attention to things you mention in passing and remember them months later. I plan experiences I know you'll love." "That's exactly the problem," she said, her voice rising. "Everything's planned. Our conversations, our dates, our future. You've probably already decided what we're doing for New Year's, Valentine's Day, and next Christmas. It's suffocating." The irony was almost funny. The thoughtfulness she used to treasure was now evidence of how wrong I was for her. "So bringing Cole to meet your parents is what? A spontaneous adventure?" At least Cole understands that life isn't meant to be lived according to a schedule. He follows his passion, takes risks, embraces uncertainty. He makes me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Cole wasn't just a friend representing spontaneity, he was actively making her feel things I apparently couldn't. "How long have you been feeling this way?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would hurt. "Since he got back to Denver. Maybe longer. I've been trying to ignore it, but I can't pretend anymore. We want different things, Marcus. You want security and predictability. I want adventure and possibility." I walked to the closet and pulled out the overnight bag she kept at my place, the one she'd gradually filled with clothes and toiletries as our relationship deepened. "You should probably take your things. Marcus, don't be dramatic. We can still talk about this. Maybe after the holidays, we can figure out how to make this work." But I was already gathering her belongings, moving with the same systematic efficiency I brought to work projects. "There's nothing to figure out, Sophie. You've made your choice. I just need time to think. Why can't you understand that? I understand perfectly. You found someone who makes you feel things I don't, so you're trading me in for the upgrade. Just be honest about it. That's when she got cruel, probably because my calm reaction wasn't giving her the dramatic scene she'd expected. You know what your real problem is? You're boring, Marcus. Stable to the point of being predictable. Safe to the point of being invisible. Cole has passion, ambition, the courage to take risks. You have spreadsheets and 5-year plans. The words were designed to hurt, and they succeeded. But I'd learned a long time ago that responding to cruelty with more cruelty just escalates situations that are already beyond repair. If that's how you see me, then you're absolutely right to leave. I handed her the bag and walked to the front door. What about the gifts? Your parents are expecting you. Tell them the truth. That you found someone more exciting than the guy who spent 3 months tracking down vintage police badges because he remembered your dad mentioning them once. Sophie's face went pale as she realized I'd overheard that conversation and planned accordingly. Marcus, I didn't mean, you meant every word. And honestly, I'm grateful you told me now instead of after I'd made an even bigger mistake. She left with tears in her eyes, but I knew they weren't for me. They were for the lifestyle and security she was walking away from, not for the person she just destroyed. The first text came on New Year's Day at 6:47 a.m. Cole left yesterday. He got a job offer in Portland and never mentioned it until he was literally packing his car. I think I made a huge mistake. I was sitting in my kitchen, drinking coffee and reading the news, enjoying the first peaceful morning I'd had in months. No drama, no emotional manipulation, no walking on eggshells around someone who'd decided I wasn't exciting enough for her life. I read Sophie's message twice, then deleted it without responding. She'd made her choice with full information about the consequences. The fact that Cole turned out to be exactly what he appeared, a guy who never stayed anywhere long enough to build anything real, wasn't my problem anymore. But Sophie wasn't giving up easily. The messages kept coming throughout the week, each one more desperate than the last. I was confused and scared about how serious we were getting. Cole represented something that wasn't real, but I didn't realize that until he left. My parents are furious with me. They keep asking how I could throw away someone like you for someone I barely knew. I'm looking at the orchids you got from my mom, and she cries every time she waters them because they remind her of how thoughtful you are. That last one almost got to me, because Linda had always been like a second mother to me, and I hated knowing I'd caused her pain. But Sophie had made that choice, not me. She'd known her parents adored me and still decided her momentary attraction to Cole was more important than our relationship. The really telling part was that Sophie never actually apologized for how she treated me. Never acknowledged that calling me boring and predictable was cruel. Never took responsibility for emotionally cheating with Cole while planning our Christmas together. Every message was about her regret and her mistakes, but never about the damage she'd done to me personally. By the second week of January, she'd recruited her friends as intermediaries. Her friend Jenny called me at work, interrupting a planning meeting with the environmental engineers. Marcus, Sophie is absolutely miserable. She knows she messed up, but she's too proud to admit how wrong she was. Can't you at least talk to her? Jenny, I appreciate that you're trying to help your friend, but Sophie made her position very clear. She wanted someone more exciting than me, and she found him. The fact that it didn't work out doesn't change what she said or how she said it. But she didn't mean those things. She was just confused and overwhelmed by her feelings for Cole. She meant every word. And honestly, she did me a favor by showing me exactly who she was before I made the biggest mistake of my life. The calls from her parents were harder to handle. Robert texted me pictures of himself using the vintage police badge magnifying glass I'd included with his collection, along with messages like, "Best gift anyone's ever given me. You're still family to us, son." Linda sent photos of the orchids blooming in her greenhouse with captions about how they reminded her of the thoughtful young man who'd become like a son to her. Those messages broke my heart because I genuinely loved Sophie's parents and thought of them as future in-laws. But I couldn't have a relationship with them while their daughter was actively trying to manipulate me back into her life. I had to text Robert back, I love you both, but I need space to heal. Sophie made her choice, and I have to respect that and move forward. Meanwhile, Sophie's social media became a masterclass in passive-aggressive manipulation. Instagram stories featuring melancholy quotes about regret and lost love, obviously designed to make me feel guilty. Posts about missing the good ones and learning too late what really matters. Photos of herself looking wistfully at places we used to go together, with captions about memories and second chances. The most pathetic was a photo of the vintage compass necklace I'd given her, with the caption, "Some gifts mean everything, and you don't realize it until it's too late to say thank you properly." As if her problem was insufficient gratitude rather than complete disrespect for our relationship. Derek, my best friend since college, found the whole situation grimly entertaining. Dude, she really thought Cole was going to stick around and build a life with her? Guy's whole identity is based on never staying anywhere long enough to pay rent twice. Apparently so. And now that reality hit, suddenly my boring predictability looks appealing again. You're not taking her back, right? Because if you do, I'm staging an intervention. That was never a question. Sophie had shown me exactly how she handled pressure and temptation. The next time life got stressful or someone more exciting came along, she'd make the same choice again. I wasn't interested in spending my life wondering when the next Cole would show up to remind her how insufficient I was. By February, I'd stopped checking Sophie's social media entirely and focused on building the life I actually wanted instead of trying to recover from the wreckage of what I'd thought we had together. The first step was taking that wilderness photography class I'd mentioned to Sophie months earlier, back when she was still pretending to be interested in my hobbies. Turns out, combining my love for the outdoors with learning a new technical skill was exactly what I needed. There's something incredibly therapeutic about spending hours in nature, focusing completely on composition and light while letting the rest of the world fade into the background. The instructor, Tom, was this weathered guy in his 50s who'd been documenting Colorado wildlife for decades. He taught us to see landscapes differently, to notice details that most people miss because they're too busy trying to capture everything at once. Good photography is about patience and planning, he said during our first field trip to Rocky Mountain National Park. You can't force the perfect shot. You have to understand your environment, anticipate the conditions, and be ready when everything aligns. Maybe it was the irony talking, but his approach to photography sounded exactly like my approach to construction projects and relationships: careful preparation, attention to detail, and patience for the right results. Sophie would have found it boring, but I found it deeply satisfying. The other major change was enrolling in a green building certification program that had been on my professional development list for years. Sustainable construction was becoming increasingly important in Denver's development market, and the additional credentials would make me significantly more valuable to firms working on environmentally conscious projects. The coursework was challenging, requiring me to master new technologies and building techniques, but I'd always thrived under academic pressure. Derek was my main support system during this period, and having a friend who understood both my personality and my goals made all the difference. We'd started taking weekend motorcycle trips to explore mountain towns I'd never had time to visit while managing Sophie's social calendar. I'd bought a used Honda CB650R, nothing flashy but reliable and perfect for Colorado's mountain roads. Learning to ride was another skill that required the systematic approach Sophie had criticized: understanding the mechanics, practicing basic techniques, gradually building confidence through experience rather than diving in recklessly. "This is exactly what you needed," Derek said as we stopped for lunch in Breckenridge after a particularly beautiful ride through the mountains. "You're actually relaxed for the first time in months. Sophie was sucking all the energy out of your life." He was right. I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed my own company, how satisfying it could be to pursue interests without having to justify them or modify them to accommodate someone else's restless need for constant stimulation. The motorcycle trips became a regular thing, and gradually Derek started bringing along friends from his rock climbing group. That's how I met Rachel in early March, during a weekend trip to Moab. She was an environmental engineer specializing in watershed management, working on projects that combined technical expertise with outdoor fieldwork. Rachel was exactly the kind of person I'd always imagined myself with, intelligent, independently successful, genuinely passionate about her work, and comfortable with the kind of planning and preparation that complex projects require. She had her own motorcycle, a Yamaha MT-07, and her own gear, and her own opinions about the best routes through Utah's canyon country. "I love that you actually researched these trips," she said as we studied maps over dinner on our first evening. "Most of the guys I know just pick a direction and hope for the best. That's how people end up stranded or worse." Rachel appreciated the same qualities in me that Sophie had found suffocating. My attention to detail meant our camping gear was always organized and complete. My planning meant we never ran out of water or got lost on unmarked trails. My systematic approach to new activities meant I could learn her interests: rock climbing, backcountry skiing, technical hiking, safely and efficiently. But the real difference was that Rachel brought her own expertise and planning skills to our adventures. She'd researched geological formations and weather patterns while I handled logistics and safety equipment. We complemented each other instead of one person carrying all the responsibility while the other just showed up expecting to be entertained. Our first real conversation happened during a challenging rock climb in Colorado National Monument. Rachel was belaying me up a route that required careful footwork and problem-solving, and she was giving me advice that showed both technical knowledge and genuine investment in my success. "You're overthinking that sequence," she called up. "Trust your balance and commit to the move. You've got the skills, you just need to execute them." When I reached the anchor point and looked down at her, I realized I was falling for someone who challenged me to be better rather than criticizing me for who I already was. Someone who shared my belief that good things come from preparation, practice, and patience rather than impulsive decisions and emotional drama. By late spring, Rachel and I were spending most weekends together, but it felt completely different from the intensity that had characterized my relationship with Sophie. This was partnership built on mutual respect and shared interests rather than dependency and constant need for validation. Rachel had her own career goals, her own friend group, her own hobbies that didn't require my participation. She enhanced my life rather than consuming it. What I didn't realize was that Sophie had been monitoring my social media recovery through fake accounts, watching my transformation from heartbroken ex-boyfriend to genuinely happy single guy with growing alarm. The first sign of her escalating behavior came in June when she started showing up at my construction sites. Not obviously stalking, just happening to drive past projects I was managing, sometimes parking across the street and watching through her car windows. My foreman Danny noticed her first. "Hey Marcus, there's some chick in a white Honda who's been sitting out there for like an hour. You know her?" I looked across the street and saw Sophie's car, with her unmistakable silhouette behind the wheel, pretending to be on her phone while clearly watching our work site. "Yeah, I know her. Ex-girlfriend who can't seem to move on. Want me to go ask her to leave? She's making some of the guys uncomfortable." I considered it, but decided direct confrontation would probably escalate things. "Not yet. Let's see if she gets bored and moves along." But Sophie didn't get bored. Over the next few weeks, she appeared at 3 different job sites, always maintaining enough distance to avoid direct confrontation but close enough to make her presence known. When I started posting pictures from my weekend motorcycle trips with Rachel, Sophie's behavior became more aggressive. She created multiple Instagram accounts using variations of fake names, all following both Rachel and me, leaving comments that walked the line between supportive and threatening. On a photo of Rachel and me at a mountain overlook, she commented from an account called Denver_hiker_girl. "Beautiful spot. Hope you're being careful on those dangerous roads. Motorcycles can be so unpredictable." When Rachel posted a picture of her rock climbing gear, Sophie commented, "Nice setup. Although I heard there have been some equipment failures lately. Stay safe out there." The messages were subtle enough to avoid being obviously harassing, but clear enough that anyone who knew the situation would recognize the implied threats. Rachel noticed the pattern before I did, being more tuned into the kind of passive-aggressive behavior that women often use against each other. "Marcus, this girl is unhinged. Look at these comments from accounts that were all created in the past month." She showed me her phone, where she'd screenshot multiple interactions from obviously fake profiles. "She's not just watching your social media. She's studying mine, learning my interests, and trying to make me paranoid about my own hobbies. The situation escalated dramatically when Sophie enlisted her friends Jen and Kelly as accomplices. They started appearing at places Rachel and I frequented: the climbing gym, our favorite coffee shop, the brewery where we'd meet Derek and his friends. Always just coincidental enough to maintain plausible deniability, but frequent enough to make it clear we were being systematically monitored. The breaking point came when someone slashed 2 tires on Rachel's motorcycle while it was parked outside her apartment complex. No other vehicles were damaged, and the cuts were clean and deliberate rather than random vandalism. The apartment's security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned that evening, but a neighbor reported seeing a white Honda in the visitor parking area around the time of the incident. "This has gone way beyond normal ex-girlfriend jealousy," Rachel said as we waited for the tow truck. "This is criminal behavior, and it's escalating. She's not just trying to win you back anymore. She's trying to eliminate her competition." I felt sick about dragging Rachel into Sophie's psychological breakdown. This woman I was falling for was being terrorized because she'd had the bad luck to fall for someone with a psychotic ex-girlfriend. "I'm going to talk to Sophie directly. This needs to stop before someone gets seriously hurt." "No, you're not. Any contact with her will just confirm that her tactics are working. We're documenting everything and going to the police." Rachel was right, but I felt helpless watching someone I cared about deal with harassment because of my past relationship choices. We filed a police report about the motorcycle incident, but without clear evidence linking Sophie to the vandalism, there wasn't much they could do beyond creating an official record. However, the officer who took our statement was familiar with escalating stalking cases and gave us practical advice about documentation and safety precautions. "Keep records of everything," Officer Martinez told us. "Screenshots of social media interactions, photos of her showing up at your locations, witness statements from friends who've seen the behavior. If this continues escalating, you'll want that evidence for a restraining order." The most disturbing discovery came when Derek did some social media investigation and found that Sophie had been posting in private Facebook groups dedicated to winning back your ex and dealing with rebound relationships. The advice she was getting from other emotionally unstable women was genuinely frightening: suggestions about sabotaging new relationships, making the new girlfriend feel unsafe, and using psychological pressure to force reconciliation. The final confrontation came at Rachel's birthday party in August, an event that should have been a celebration but turned into the moment I realized Sophie had completely lost touch with reality. We'd planned a small gathering at a mountain cabin outside Boulder, just close friends, good food, and the kind of relaxed atmosphere that Rachel actually enjoyed instead of the expensive, Instagram-worthy events Sophie used to demand. I'd spent weeks coordinating with Rachel's friends and family, organizing a surprise that reflected her actual interests rather than some generic idea of what women supposedly want. Everything was perfect until Sophie appeared at 9 p.m., clearly drunk and accompanied by Jen and Kelly, who looked uncomfortable but committed to their friend's delusion. "I wasn't invited to the party?" Sophie slurred, swaying slightly as she stood in the doorway of the cabin. "That's interesting, since we all used to be such good friends." Rachel handled the situation with more grace than Sophie deserved. "Sophie, this is a private party for people close to me. I think you should leave before this gets more uncomfortable than it already is." "Uncomfortable? What's uncomfortable is watching my boyfriend pretend to be happy with someone who's obviously just a rebound. Marcus, we need to talk privately." The word boyfriend hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everyone at the party, Rachel's engineering colleagues, climbing partners, family members, was staring at this unstable woman claiming ownership over someone who'd clearly moved on months ago. "Sophie, we broke up 8 months ago. You chose Cole over me, remember? We're not getting back together, and you need to accept that and move forward with your life." That was a mistake. I was confused and scared about how serious we were getting. "You know Cole meant nothing compared to what we had together." She turned to Rachel with pure venom in her eyes. "And you're just taking advantage of his rebound vulnerability. Do you really think this is real? He's just using you to make me jealous." Rachel stepped forward, and I could see her engineering mind calculating the most efficient way to end this situation. "Sophie, I don't know what relationship you think you had with Marcus, but the man I know would never describe anyone the way he's described you. You treated him like he was boring and predictable until someone more exciting came along. Now that didn't work out, you want him back. That's not love, that's convenience." Sophie's composure completely shattered. She started screaming about how I'd brainwashed Rachel against her, how we'd stolen her life, how she'd never get over losing the best thing that ever happened to her. When Derek and two of Rachel's friends moved to escort her out, she grabbed a beer bottle and threatened to throw it at Rachel. That's when someone called the police. The officers who responded were professional but firm, and when they learned about the previous stalking incidents and property damage, they arrested Sophie for criminal harassment and issued a temporary restraining order on the spot. Watching her get handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car while screaming my name was surreal and deeply sad. This was someone I'd once planned to marry, reduced to a cautionary tale about what happens when you can't accept reality. The restraining order became permanent after a court hearing where Rachel and I presented months of documented harassment evidence. Sophie was also required to attend counseling and perform community service, and her friends Jen and Kelly were warned about participating in future stalking behavior. 6 months later, Rachel and I got engaged during a sunrise hike at the same spot where I'd planned to propose to Sophie 2 years earlier. This time, everything was different. The right person, the right reasons, the right foundation built on mutual respect rather than dependence and manipulation. We planned a small wedding ceremony in the mountains, surrounded by people who actually supported our relationship instead of trying to sabotage it. Sophie eventually moved to Portland, presumably to start fresh somewhere without constant reminders of the life she'd thrown away. I heard through mutual friends that she was working at a different hospital and dating someone new, hopefully having learned something about appreciating stability over excitement. I genuinely hope she found whatever she was looking for, but I'm grateful every day that her search for adventure led her away from me and towards someone who actually deserved what I had to offer. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is having someone show you exactly who they are before you make the biggest mistake of your life.